Helena felt a mix of anxiety and hope as the bus ascended the narrow road leading to the spiritual retreat. The place was isolated, surrounded by mountains and dense forests, as if it were hidden from the world. For her, this distance represented an opportunity to escape her worries and perhaps find a way to heal the wounds she had carried for so long. Upon arrival, she stepped off and looked around, noticing other participants who also appeared anxious. Some wore shy smiles, while others stared at the ground, visibly uncomfortable. Marco, the retreat leader, stood at the front, welcoming everyone with a warm smile. His calm and inviting presence was reassuring, and he greeted Helena as she approached. "Welcome," he said with a serene gaze. "I hope this retreat is what you're looking for." Helena nodded, still feeling a bit unsure, but determined to make the most of the experience. After a brief introduction, Marco led everyone to the main hall, where he explained the retreat schedule, meditation sessions, reflection activities, and moments to explore the surrounding nature. "Here, we want you to feel safe to explore your emotions and find peace," he said, before releasing the participants to settle into their simple yet cozy rooms. As Helena walked to her room, she felt a weight on her chest begin to lift, as if she were about to enter a refuge of tranquility. But deep down, a lingering sense of unease persisted, suggesting that this peace might soon be challenged in ways she could not yet imagine. The first night at the retreat arrived quickly. After a day of introductions and introductory activities, Marco invited the participants to a nighttime meditation session around the central campfire. The flame danced gently, casting flickering shadows over the participants' thoughtful faces. Helena sat in the circle, trying to relax and let her worries fade into the stillness of the moment. As everyone closed their eyes and followed Marco's instructions, Helena suddenly felt an unexpected chill. Even with the warmth of the fire, a cold sensation crept up her back. She opened her eyes and looked around, expecting to see someone nearby, but everyone appeared focused and still. Trying to ignore the sensation, she closed her eyes again and took a deep breath. Suddenly, a muffled sound echoed in the distance, like an indistinct whisper. Helena tried to concentrate, thinking it was her mind playing tricks, but the sound persisted, almost like a murmur in her ear. When she opened her eyes again, she caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure standing in the darkness beyond the fire, with a strangely familiar posture. She blinked, and the figure vanished. Helena shook her head, trying to dismiss the image, but she couldn't shake the feeling of disturbance. When the meditation ended, she approached Marco to mention what she had felt, but before she could speak, he looked at her with a calm smile. "Sometimes our deepest thoughts find ways to manifest when we are in a place like this," he said, as if he knew exactly what Helena wanted to convey. She didn't respond, but a doubt began to grow in her mind. Something felt off, and she sensed that this would only be the first of many strange experiences she would encounter at the retreat. The next morning, the retreat seemed to be in its usual rhythm. The participants began the day with a guided walk led by Marco, who encouraged them to reflect on their intentions for the coming days. Helena tried to focus on the activity, but the unease from the previous night still lingered over her. In the afternoon, the participants divided for individual activities. Camila, an extroverted and always smiling woman, chose to spend some time alone by the lake, contemplating the calm water. It was there that she had her first strange experience. As she looked at her reflection in the water, something changed. The image she saw was not her own, but a distorted version with a forced smile and eyes filled with sadness. Camila blinked repeatedly, but the reflection remained the same, as if mocking her cheerful facade. Startled, she quickly stepped away, trying to ignore what she had seen. Meanwhile, Rodrigo, who had always been skeptical and distant, explored one of the nearby trails. He stopped to rest when he heard footsteps behind him. He looked around, but there was no one there. The sound repeated, and this time he heard a voice, a low whisper that sounded as if someone were echoing his own thoughts. "You don't belong here." Rodrigo tried to shake off the discomfort, but his heart raced, and he hurried back to the retreat. Helena, for her part, had another unsettling vision while sitting alone in the main hall. For a brief moment, she saw the same figure from the previous night, now closer and clearer. It was as if it were watching her, studying her, waiting for her to recognize something. When the image faded, Helena noticed her hands trembling. The manifestations were becoming more intense and harder to ignore. As the day came to an end, it became clear that something was unsettling everyone there, bringing to the surface fears and insecurities they tried to hide. Each participant began to realize that what they were meant to confront during the retreat was not only what lay within their minds, but also something manifesting around them. That night, the atmosphere at the retreat was heavy. The participants, who had previously shared smiles and casual conversations, now appeared more reserved and restless. Helena noticed she wasn't the only one feeling uncomfortable. Camila and Rodrigo also looked visibly disturbed. She decided she needed to talk to someone to find a way to understand what was happening. During dinner, Helena approached Camila, who was sitting alone. "Have you felt something strange here too?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Camila hesitated before responding, as if relieved that someone had brought it up. "I saw something," she said, lowering her voice. "I know it sounds crazy, but I think what I saw wasn't real, or at least it shouldn't have been." Shortly after, Rodrigo joined them, drawn by the conversation. He looked uncomfortable, but determined to share what he was feeling. "I also heard things," he admitted reluctantly. "Voices that sounded like, I don't know my own thoughts, but distorted. Is this some kind of trick the retreat plays?" Helena and Camila exchanged glances, realizing they had more in common in their experiences than they had imagined. The three decided to seek out Marco to discuss what was happening. When they found him, he was in the main hall, organizing materials for the next meditation session. They explained their experiences, describing the visions and strange sounds they had encountered. Marco listened attentively, his face serious, and after a long silence, he replied, "I've never seen this happen here before," he said. "The retreat was created to be a safe space, but it seems something is bringing to light what you have deep within, hidden away. Perhaps it's the very nature of being here, away from everything, that allows these fears to manifest." Helena frowned. "But why now? And why all of us?" Marco sighed, as if pondering what to say. "Sometimes being in a place like this forces the mind to confront things it tries to avoid," he explained. "But if this is happening so intensely, we need to understand what is causing it." The three agreed to investigate together, with Marco offering his help. They knew that to find answers, they needed to understand what lay behind these manifestations. And more importantly, they would have to unite to face whatever came next. The following day, the group began their investigation. Helena, Camila, Rodrigo, and Marco gathered early in the morning to discuss a plan. Marco suggested they explore the less frequented areas of the retreat, places that had seen little use since he took over the location. "Perhaps there's something we're overlooking," he said, with a concern he tried to hide. They split up and began exploring different parts of the retreat. Helena and Camila went to an old cabin that was far from the main building, overgrown with ivy and nearly hidden by vegetation. Upon entering, they found piles of old documents and dusty objects that seemed to have been left behind long ago. While sifting through the papers, Helena found a notebook that caught her attention. The pages were filled with confused notes and unsettling drawings. depicting distorted figures and repeated words, as if someone were trying to exorcise thoughts from their mind. Meanwhile, Rodrigo and Marco explored the basement of the main building. The air was colder and heavier there, as if something were lurking in the darkness. In the back, they found a small locked door. After forcing the lock, they entered a room that appeared to have been used for meetings, but something felt off. On the walls, they saw handwritten phrases, almost like a confession mural. "I can't forget. The pain never stops. They're still here." Rodrigo turned to Marco, who looked visibly shaken. "Did you know this was here?" Rodrigo asked. Marco shook his head slowly. "I knew the retreat had a past," he admitted finally. "Before it became a spiritual retreat, this place was a refuge for people seeking to reconnect with themselves. But many came here carrying deep burdens and traumas. Perhaps this is what we're feeling, the repressed emotions that were never resolved." Helena, Camila, Rodrigo, and Marco reconvened and shared what they had discovered. Gradually, an unsettling truth began to emerge. The manifestations were not merely a result of the current participants' insecurities. They were tied to something older, a legacy of pain that still lingered over the place. "Maybe this retreat isn't just a refuge for us," Helena said seriously. "Maybe it's a mirror, reflecting everything we're trying to hide." The discovery in the basement left the group unsettled, but also more determined to understand the origin of the manifestations. Marco seemed especially affected. Helena noticed he had become quieter and more reserved since they left the room with the confessions on the wall. She decided to talk to him that night, after dinner, while the others rested. They sat near the campfire, where the flickering light cast shadows that seemed to dance around them. Marco took a deep breath, as if searching for the right words. "When I decided to open this retreat, I wanted to create a safe place where people could find peace," he began. "But I think I was trying to do that for myself as well." Helena watched him closely, waiting for him to continue. "I came here years ago, after my sister disappeared," he said, his voice low. "She struggled with severe depression, and the last time I saw her, she was here at this place. I brought her, thinking I could help, but she vanished and we never found her." Marco looked away, guilt evident in his eyes. "Since then, I've been trying to cope with the feeling that I failed, that I couldn't save her." Helena felt a tightness in her chest as she listened to Marco's story. "That's why you created the retreat," she said softly. "To try to find the peace you couldn't achieve for her." Marco nodded, tears in his eyes. "But now I realize that perhaps I opened a door to something I still don't understand. These manifestations, these echoes, they're connected to all of us. And maybe I triggered something by trying to hide my own pain." Helena placed her hand over his, trying to offer comfort. "If these manifestations are part of all this, then maybe the only way to deal with them is to confront them. We can't keep running away." Marco looked at her, and for the first time, he seemed relieved not to bear that weight alone. "You're right," he said, "but I don't know how to do that, not yet." The group felt more united than ever, but Marco's revelations meant the manifestations wouldn't disappear without a direct confrontation with the traumas being projected onto the retreat. They would need to face their fears and confront the ghosts of the past to find a solution. The manifestations began to intensify alarmingly. The retreat participants, who had previously only experienced fleeting visions and distant whispers, were now being confronted directly by figures that seemed to emerge from their worst nightmares. Helena, Camila, Rodrigo, and Marco knew they were reaching a critical point and needed to act before everything spiraled out of control. That night, Marco decided to gather everyone in the main hall. "We need to face this together," he said with a firmness that masked the fear in his voice. "If the manifestations are reflecting our traumas and insecurities, then perhaps confronting them is the key to ending this." The group sat in a circle, holding candles that softly illuminated the space. Marco began to guide a collective meditation, asking each person to focus on the feelings they were suppressing. The candles flickered as he spoke, and the shadows around them seemed to move as if waiting for something. Camila was the first to open up. She began to speak about her constant struggle with self-image and how she had always felt inadequate, hiding her insecurities behind forced smiles. As she spoke, a figure materialized before her, a distorted version of herself, with an exaggerated smile and sad eyes. Camila took a deep breath and confronted the figure, murmuring, "I accept who I am, even with my imperfections." The figure hesitated and then began to dissolve, as if it had been released. Rodrigo was next. He spoke about the loss of a loved one and how his disbelief and skepticism were ways to mask his inability to deal with the pain. A tall, dark shadow appeared before him, echoing his words of disbelief. "I don't have all the answers," he said, his voice trembling. "But that doesn't mean I can't feel." The shadow receded, slowly disappearing. Finally, it was Helena's turn. The figure she had seen repeatedly was now closer than ever, as if waiting for her to confront it. Helena felt her heart race, but she knew she couldn't keep running away. "I lost someone important," she began, tears in her eyes. "And I blamed myself for a long time for not being able to do more. But I need to accept that I can't change the past." As she spoke these words, the figure moved closer, revealing a familiar face that made Helena tremble. It was a version of herself, carrying all the weight of the pain and guilt she had accumulated. Helena stepped forward, and when she touched the figure's hand, she felt a comforting warmth. "I forgive myself," she whispered, and with that, the figure dissolved into a cloud of light. Marco observed all of this with admiration, but he knew he also needed to confront his own demon. He stood up, and without saying a word, a figure appeared in the center of the circle, a young woman, his sister. "I tried to save you," he said, his voice breaking, "but I could never accept that you chose to leave." The figure of his sister smiled gently at him, and Marco finally understood he needed to let go. "I love you, and I forgive myself for not being able to do more." The figure dissolved into a soft light, illuminating the entire hall. With the final confrontation, the manifestation ceased. The hall felt lighter, and the shadows finally disappeared, leaving only the united group, surrounded by a sense of peace and relief. They knew they had faced their fears and, in doing so, freed the place from its emotional burden. After the intense confrontation, the hall was immersed in a deep and serene silence, as if all the tension that had hung over the retreat had finally dissipated. The candles remained lit, but now the light seemed clearer and more welcoming, reflecting the tranquility the group felt. Helena, Camila, Rodrigo, and Marco were still seated in a circle, trying to absorb what they had just experienced. Helena felt an indescribable relief, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She looked at Marco and saw that he also seemed different, lighter, almost smiling, despite the tears still glistening in his eyes. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting myself by keeping all of this inside," she said, breaking the silence. Confronting it was difficult, but necessary. Camila nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear. "I spent so long trying to be perfect, trying to hide what I felt," she confessed. "But admitting that, even to myself, made me feel more authentic." Rodrigo, who always maintained an air of toughness and disbelief, appeared vulnerable for the first time. "I think we all needed this," he said quietly. "This place, it wasn't just showing us our fears. It was giving us a chance to face them." Marco took a deep breath and stood up. "What happened here was more than I could have imagined when I created this retreat," he said, looking at each participant. "I think that, in some way, we all brought something here, and it manifested in a way we didn't expect. But you were brave enough to face it and find a way to heal." The group stayed there for a while longer, talking and sharing their feelings. It was as if they had finally found a genuine connection, something that could only have emerged after everything they had been through together. The feeling of peace that filled the hall was not just the absence of manifestations, but the acceptance each had found within themselves. With the first light of morning, Marco suggested everyone join in a final meditation around the campfire. It was a moment of farewell, but also of renewal. As they sat together in silence, there was no need for words. The peace they felt was a confirmation that, no matter how difficult it had been, they had found refuge not just in the retreat, but within themselves. The sun rose with a gentle light, illuminating the retreat in an almost magical way, as if celebrating the end of a long night of torment. The participants, now calmer and united, prepared to leave. There was a feeling of renewal in the air, and each of them carried a look of relief and gratitude. Helena, Camila, Rodrigo, and Marco gathered one last time around the campfire, which was now just a circle of ashes. The place that had been the backdrop for meditations, confessions, and confrontations felt like a symbol of transformation. "I don't know what I expected to find here," Rodrigo said, looking at the ashes. "But it definitely wasn't this, and I think it was exactly what I needed." Camila smiled, this time a genuine smile, free from the weight of insecurity that always seemed to linger in her expressions. "Me too. I think we all found something we didn't know we were looking for," she said, looking at the others. Helena agreed, feeling an internal peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. "It was hard, but I'm leaving here with a new perspective, and I think I can finally move on." Marco, who had been a silent guide for everyone during the retreat, looked at the group with a mix of pride and sadness. "This retreat has always been a place to seek answers, but you taught me that sometimes the answers lie in facing what we fear to see. I thank you for being so courageous." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And personally, I want to thank you for helping me deal with what I never could face alone." The group exchanged hugs, a farewell that felt more like a new beginning than an ending. Marco accompanied the participants to the retreat gate, where their bags were ready for departure. "I hope you find peace in whatever comes next," he said, as everyone prepared to leave. "And remember, the refuge you found here is within each of you." Helena took one last look around, absorbing the tranquil landscape and the clear blue sky. She knew that when she left the retreat, she would carry with her not just memories of the manifestations and confrontations, but also the feeling of having finally found the strength to forgive herself and move forward. With a smile, she got into the car that would take her back to the city, leaving behind a place that had changed her in ways she could never have foreseen. As the car drove away from the retreat, Helena looked out the window, watching the winding road cut through the dense forest. The place she had just left still lingered in her mind, not just as a physical refuge, but as a milestone of transformation. She thought of all the moments she had felt lost, trapped by her own insecurities, and realized that now something had changed. The peace she felt was real and solid, like a newly built foundation. During the drive back, she reflected on everything that had happened. What had seemed like a simple retreat had transformed into a deep journey of self-discovery and healing. The manifestations, frightening and confusing, forced everyone to confront the parts of themselves they had avoided. But it was this confrontation that brought true liberation. Helena understood that healing often did not come from escaping problems, but from facing them head-on, no matter how painful it might be. Upon arriving in the city, Helena noticed that the world around her seemed clearer, more vibrant. For the first time in a long time, she felt connected to it, rather than a distant observer. Entering her apartment, she spotted an old photo on the table, which had previously only brought memories of sadness. Now, she looked at the image with affection and acceptance. She knew that the pain wouldn't disappear completely, but she also understood that she could coexist with it in a healthier, lighter way. In the following days, Helena kept in touch with Camila and Rodrigo. They had shared a profound experience, and even outside the retreat, they still felt the connection they had formed. Camila sent a message telling how she was beginning to explore her passions, unafraid of others' judgment. Rodrigo mentioned that, although he still felt somewhat skeptical, he was more open to understanding his emotions and seeking support when needed. Marco also sent a brief but meaningful message. "Thank you for helping me see that the retreat was as much for me as it was for you," he wrote. "You will always have a place here if you need it." Helena smiled as she read it, feeling that their journey in the retreat had only been the beginning of a new chapter. Now, each of them was ready to forge their own path, more aware and free from the burdens that had brought them there. And as she moved forward, she knew that wherever she went, she would always carry with her the strength she discovered in that refuge of souls.